At 7:42 a.m. on August 17, 1943, Technical Sergeant James McKenna crouched beneath the left wing of a P-38 Lightning at WW2’s airfield, New Guinea. The air was thick with humidity and the faint smell of engine oil. McKenna's eyes stayed fixed on his pilot, Lieutenant Robert Hayes, a 23-year-old kid from Kansas, about to take off on a mission everyone quietly knew he might not survive. Hayes had only 6 combat missions behind him. No confirmed kills. No lucky escapes. Just 6 flights straight into danger. And this one looked worse than all the rest. Intelligence had reported 18 Japanese Zero fighters inbound, light, fast, and merciless. Hayes and his squadron were ordered to intercept them head-on. McKenna had spent 8 months keeping those P-38s alive, tightening bolts, patching holes, coaxing every ounce of performance from the twin-engine beasts. He loved the aircraft. Sleek, powerful, deadly at high altitude. But he also knew its secret flaw, one that was quietly killing American pilots every day. The P-38 could not turn with a Zero. The Japanese A6M0 was lighter, more agile, and could complete a full horizontal turn in nearly half the time. In a dogfight, that difference meant life or death. The official doctrine was clear: never turn with a Zero. Use speed. Use altitude. Dive in, strike, and climb back out. Hit and run, never linger. But the enemy had learned to exploit that rule. They baited American pilots into turning engagements, luring them just long enough to slip inside their radius and get on their tail. Once a Zero was there, the fight was over. The 5th Air Force had already lost 37 P-38s in just 6 weeks. Most were shot down after being trapped in those deadly turns. McKenna had watched it happen again and again. Young men climbing into their planes full of confidence and never coming back. Command blamed pilot error. Instructors said they weren't following procedure. But McKenna didn't buy it. The problem wasn't the pilots. It was mechanical. He had spent hours studying the flight control system. The aileron cables, the ones that controlled the aircraft's roll, ran through both tail booms before looping forward to the wings. They carried just a fraction of slack, barely 3/8 of an inch. But that was enough. At high speeds, it didn't matter. The plane responded instantly. But at lower speeds, during tight turns, exactly when a pilot needed control most, that tiny delay could be fatal. That slack meant the difference between rolling inside a Zero's turn or being riddled with bullets before you even reacted. McKenna had raised the issue months earlier. The engineering officer brushed him off, saying the cable tension was within factory specs. Adjusting it would void the warranty and require approval from Lockheed engineers, 7,000 miles away in California. So McKenna did something he wasn't supposed to do. One quiet evening, under the cover of dusk, he took a length of piano wire from a damaged plane. He cut it to 6 inches, bent it into a Z-shape, and rigged it as a makeshift tensioner on Lieutenant Hayes's left aileron control cable. It added less than half a pound of tension, but it eliminated the slack completely. The whole job took 8 minutes. No paperwork. No witnesses. The morning inspection team never noticed. They were too focused on oil pressure and ammunition loadouts. McKenna said nothing. He just watched as Hayes taxied out, engines roaring, and disappeared into the pale tropical sky toward a swarm of waiting Japanese fighters. What happened in the next 17 minutes would change the way every P-38 in the Pacific flew. The first pilot McKenna ever lost to a Zero was Lieutenant David Chin, July 9, 1943. Chin had been in theater for just 3 weeks. A quiet kid from Sacramento who talked more about cars than combat. McKenna liked him. They'd bonded over Greece and California sunlight, trying to pretend the war wasn't closing in around them. On that morning, Chin took off at 6:15 for a fighter sweep over La. 2 hours later, he came back with 3 bullet holes in his left boom, and a story that didn't sit right. He told McKenna a Zero had gotten inside his turn. He'd tried to roll and dive away, just like the manual said, but the plane felt slow, sluggish, like there was a hesitation between when he moved the stick and when the P-38 responded. The Zero nearly killed him. His wingman saved his life with a lucky burst. McKenna inspected the bullet holes. Tight grouping. Perfect deflection shooting. Whoever that Japanese pilot was, he had read Chen's move like a book. A week later, Chen was dead. Different plane. Same story. Caught in a turn, too slow to roll out. Then came Captain William Morrison, a veteran, disciplined, 11 kills to his name. He knew the P-38's strengths and weaknesses by heart. On August 3rd, Morrison led his flight against 8 Zeros over Oro Bay at 12,000 feet. And that was when everything changed. Captain William Morrison got his first Zero on the opening pass, clean and fast. He banked, came around for a second run, but 2 Japanese fighters reversed on him. McKenna later heard the radio chatter from the mission. Morrison's voice came through the static, tight with strain. Controls feel mushy, rolling inverted, splitting S. Moments later, his wingman called out that Morrison's lightning wasn't responding. The Zeros stayed glued to him through the maneuver. At 4,000 feet, they cut him to pieces. Morrison's plane went down trailing black smoke. Morrison's crew chief, Rodriguez, a tough mechanic from Texas and one of McKenna's closest friends, was devastated. He was sure something had been wrong with the aircraft. After they recovered the wreckage, Rodriguez checked everything: engine settings, control linkages, cable tension, aileron rigging. Every number fell within factory specifications. The report came back as pilot error. Rodriguez didn't believe it. Neither did McKenna. By mid-August, McKenna had watched 17 pilots die. Some he'd known for months. Others he'd only met during a quick pre-flight check. But every one of them had flown a plane he'd worked on. He'd signed their maintenance logs, saluted them on the runway, and watched their P-38s disappear into the tropical haze. Some returned. Most didn't. The ones who made it back told the same story again and again. The lightning feels slow when I yank it around. It doesn't respond right. There's a lag. Pilots blamed themselves. They thought the plane was just heavy, big twin engines, wide wings, large control surfaces. A bit of delay seemed normal. But McKenna knew better. He'd felt that delay with his own hands while tightening those cables. That tiny bit of slack he could never get rid of. He started paying closer attention. When he plucked the control cables during maintenance, he noticed a sound, a low, soft twang. Loose cables sang differently from tight ones. Every P-38 on the line sounded just a little loose. Still within spec, but not right. One evening, after Morrison's death, McKenna shared his observation with Rodriguez. They stood beside a grounded Lightning, tools scattered across the tarmac, the jungle buzzing in the dark. Rodriguez asked, "So what do we do?" McKenna hesitated. "Nothing official," he said quietly. "But unofficially, there's a fix. Just not one the Army would ever approve. It'll break every rule in the manual." They both knew what that meant: court-martial, dishonorable discharge, maybe even prison. But both men were tired of burying pilots and pretending the problem didn't exist. The truth was, the pilots weren't failing the airplane. The airplane was failing the pilots. The Army Air Forces drilled the same doctrine into every man who climbed into a Lightning. Never turn with a Zero. Use speed, use altitude, hit and run. But war didn't follow doctrine. Combat was chaos. And in chaos, the P-38's weakness showed itself every time. Lieutenant Robert Hayes had been in New Guinea for 2 months. 23 years old, a farm kid from Iowa. 6 combat missions, no kills. Not because he was inexperienced, because he followed the rules too closely. And the rules weren't keeping him alive. On his 3rd mission, he dived on a Zero from altitude, building up speed to over 400 miles an hour, attacking from the sun just like the manual said. The Zero snapped left and dove. Hayes rolled in pursuit, but the plane felt heavy, sluggish, like it was moving through syrup. By the time he lined up the shot, the Zero was gone. His 4th mission went worse. Hayes and his wingman jumped 2 Zeros at 15,000 feet. Hayes fired first, missed, and rolled hard right to follow. His wingman shouted over the radio, "2 more coming down on you." Hayes tried to level and dive, but again the Lightning hesitated, just long enough for one of the descending Zeros to fire a 3-second burst into his right boom. The 20mm shells didn't penetrate, but the hit shook him. Hayes broke off, limped back to base with both engines trailing smoke. Then came the 5th mission, the one that changed him. Lieutenant Thomas Parker, 21, from Boston. Hayes' closest friend. They'd gone through training together, shared the same bunkhouse, traded letters from home. On August 14th, Parker's flight tangled with enemy fighters over Finschhafen. In the confusion, he got separated from the group. 2 Zeros got on his tail. Parker rolled hard, reversed, tried a scissors maneuver, everything he'd been trained to do. It didn't matter. The Zeros stayed with him. Hayes could hear it all over the radio. Parker's breathing turning frantic, his voice cracking as he called for help. "She's not turning. She's not turning fast enough." Then came the sound of gunfire. And then silence. That night, no one in the squadron slept. Parker's bunk stayed empty. His gear was quietly packed up and sent home. The official report said pilot error during defensive maneuvering. McKenna read the log entry himself. He had serviced Parker's plane that same morning. Everything had been perfect, the timing, the surfaces, the cable tension, all within spec. And that was exactly the problem. The airplane had been fine. The paperwork said so. The instruments said so. But Parker was dead anyway. And McKenna knew why. That tiny fraction of a second between stick and response, the barely noticeable slack the manual said was within tolerance, had killed Parker, just like it had killed Morrison, Chun, and 14 others. The worst part wasn't the reports or the briefings. It was the smell. Every morning, McKenna worked in the maintenance area surrounded by the sharp scent of aviation fuel, the metallic tang of hot engines, and the sticky sweetness of hydraulic fluid. It was the smell of aircraft being readied for war. Some of those planes would return by sunset. Some would not. And McKenna would still be there the next morning, breathing in the same air, tightening the same bolts, watching new pilots walk toward machines that might not respond fast enough to save them. That evening, August 16th, Lieutenant Hayes found him hunched over his Lightning, tools spread out across the concrete. Hayes looked exhausted, not from the heat, but from the weight of what he knew was coming. "Is there anything you can do?" he asked quietly. "Anything to make her roll faster? I don't care if it's regulation or not. I just want a chance." McKenna met his eyes. What he saw wasn't courage, it was fear mixed with resolve. The kind of look you saw in men who'd already accepted they were going to die unless something changed. "Come back in the morning," McKenna said. "I'll see what I can do." That night, he worked alone. By 11 p.m., the hangar was empty. The generator hum outside was a low vibration in the dark. Insects buzzed around the overhead lights. The tropical air was thick, heavy, and still. McKenna rolled up his sleeves and opened the inspection panel on Hayes's left boom. The metal was still warm from the afternoon sun. Inside, the control cable gleamed faintly under his flashlight. He gripped it and pulled. He could feel it. That slack, maybe 3/8 of an inch, just like every other Lightning on the field. His hands were slick with grease, his fingers cramped from a full day's work. But that looseness, it felt wrong. He knew exactly what he had to do. The piano wire came from a wrecked P-38 that had ground looped 2 weeks earlier. The plane was scrap, but McKenna had salvaged parts before it was shipped to the depot, including a 6-inch piece of high-tensile piano wire from the rudder trim system. He'd kept it in his tool bag without knowing why. Now he did. He sat on the hangar floor, flashlight wedged between his knees, pliers in hand. The wire fought him, stiff, unyielding. It slipped twice, slicing his thumb. Blood ran down his wrist, mixing with the oil on his hands. He wiped it on his coveralls and kept working. After 8 minutes, the wire was shaped into a small, perfect Z. A makeshift tensioner. Simple, risky, effective. Installing it was harder. The space inside the boom was tight. He had to work one-handed, shoulder pressed against cold aluminum, flashlight beam shaking. Sweat rolled down his back. When he reached the pulley junction, the clevis pin slipped from his fingers and vanished into the shadows. He froze, listening to it bounce somewhere deep inside the structure. 5 long minutes later, he found it. His heartbeat hadn't slowed once. He reconnected the cable, slipped the wire tensioner in place, and forced the pin through. The fit was snug, perfect. He pulled on the cable to test it. The aileron moved the instant he touched it. No hesitation. No slack. For the first time, the control felt alive. He exhaled long and slow. When he replaced the inspection panel and cleaned up his tools, it was 1:15 a.m. The night outside was quiet except for the distant rumble of aircraft engines. Japanese night raiders, maybe. The sound made his stomach twist. He had just violated nearly a dozen maintenance regulations, modified a control system without authorization, and installed a non-standard part. If the modification failed, Hayes would die, and McKenna would take the blame. But if it worked, maybe Hayes would live. He didn't sleep that night. Just lay in his bunk staring at the ceiling fan, listening to the generators drone in the dark. At 6:30 a.m., McKenna was back at the flight line. The morning air was cool, heavy with dew. He watched the ground crew fuel and arm Hayes's Lightning. Watched Hayes stride out from the briefing tent, helmet under his arm, shoulders squared. Watched him climb into the cockpit and give a thumbs up. At 7:42, the twin engines roared to life. The P-38 rolled down the strip and lifted into the pale sky, sunlight flashing off its silver wings. McKenna stood there until the sound faded into the distance. All he could do now was wait. The radio crackled to life at 8:14. Hayes's flight of 4 Lightnings had engaged 9 enemy fighters at 13,000 feet over the Horn Gulf. The sun was behind them, perfect conditions for a surprise dive attack. Hayes flew number 3 in the formation. His element leader called out the bounce. They rolled in. Hayes picked his target, a 0 at the back of the Japanese formation. He dove from altitude, throttles wide open, the Lightning screaming toward the sea. Airspeed climbed past 380 miles an hour. The 0 filled his gun sight. He could see the red rising sun on the fuselage, the pilot's head turning inside the canopy. Hayes squeezed the trigger. The Lightning shuddered as 4.50 caliber machine guns and a 20mm cannon unleashed a storm of fire. Tracers streaked across the sky. Most missed. A few found their mark, sparking off the 0's wing. Not enough to bring it down. The Japanese pilot rolled right and dove hard. Hayes rolled after him, and that's when he felt it. The airplane responded instantly. No lag, no delay. The stick moved, and the wings followed, smooth and immediate. It was like the Lightning had come alive beneath him, like it had been waiting all along for his command. He rolled 90 degrees in half the usual time, pulled through, and dropped the nose. The 0 filled his sight again. He fired another burst. The rounds walked up the fuselage, tail, midsection, cockpit. The 0's engine erupted in flames. The plane flipped inverted, trailing black smoke as it fell toward the jungle below. Hayes had his first kill. There was no time to celebrate. His wingman's voice cut through the radio. 3 0's diving from above. Hayes looked up. They were coming fast, shallow dive, high speed. They'd seen their comrade go down, and were coming for revenge. He shoved the throttles forward, engines howling, and began to climb. But the 0's were faster in the dive. They'd be on him in seconds. Every instinct screamed, climb. Run. But Hayes didn't climb. He did the one thing every manual told him never to do. He turned. That was doctrine. Keep climbing, never turn with a 0. But doctrine didn't mean survival that morning. Hayes ignored it. He rolled hard left and pulled back on the stick. The P-38 snapped through the turn like a living thing. The horizon spun past, the sky and sea trading places in a blur. Ahead of him, the lead 0 was trying to follow but couldn't keep up. The Japanese pilot hadn't expected the Lightning to reverse that fast. For a brief moment, the 0 hung exposed in Hayes's gun sight. Hayes squeezed the trigger. The heavy guns roared. Tracers sliced through the air and slammed into the 0's left wing root. The wing folded in half like paper, and the fighter tumbled out of control. 1 kill. The remaining 2 0's split apart, trying to cross-turn and force Hayes to overshoot. It was an old trick, and normally it worked. But Hayes's Lightning was different now. Every time they reversed, his plane moved instantly, no delay, no hesitation. It was like flying without friction. Hayes matched them turn for turn. His body strained against the GS, but the airplane felt eager, almost joyful. Then one of the 0's made a fatal mistake. The pilot tightened too hard, bleeding off speed. Hayes slipped inside the turn and lined up his shot at barely 200 feet. He fired. The burst tore through the 0's fuselage, and the plane exploded in midair. Fragments clattered off Hayes's right boom, making the Lightning shudder. 3 kills. The last 0 dove for the jungle, smoke trailing behind. Hayes didn't chase. His fuel was low, his ammunition nearly gone. He pulled back, climbed, and rejoined what was left of his flight. The fight had lasted 7 minutes. When he touched down at WW2’s at 9:03 a.m., McKenna was already waiting on the line. Hayes cut the engines, climbed out of the cockpit, and staggered forward. His hands trembled. Sweat darkened his flight suit. He walked straight to McKenna and said only 2 words. It worked. Neither man realized that 6 pilots had witnessed the fight from above. One of them, Captain Frank Mitchell of the 475th Fighter Group, had seen everything from 15,000 feet. He knew Hayes was a solid pilot, but what he'd just watched defied logic. The Lightning rolled and turned like it had shed half its weight. When they landed, Mitchell found Hayes in the debriefing hut. Hayes was still shaking as he filled out the combat report, 3 confirmed kills. Mitchell asked what was different. Hayes said the plane just felt alive, more responsive. If anyone knew why, it was McKenna. 2 hours later, Mitchell found McKenna in the maintenance area, working on another P-38, hands black with grease, coveralls soaked with hydraulic fluid. Mitchell didn't waste time. What did you do to his airplane? McKenna hesitated, then told him everything. The piano wire, the Z-shaped tensioner, the unauthorized mod that could get him court-martialed. When he finished, Mitchell was silent for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "Can you do it to mine?" McKenna warned him of the risks. If the mod failed, they'd both answer for it. Mitchell didn't care. He'd buried 4 pilots in the last month, all killed in turning fights they couldn't win. If this gave them even a chance, it was worth it. That night, McKenna stayed in the hangar again. Same tools, same ritual, same quiet defiance of the rulebook. Mitchell flew the next morning and came back grinning. "It's a new airplane," he said. "She flies like a fighter now." Word spread. Pilots whispered in the ready room. Mechanics shared notes in the maintenance bay. McKenna showed a few trusted crew chiefs how to make the tensioner, cut the wire, bend the Z, install it inline. 8 minutes, that's all it took. By August 20th, 9 P-38s had been modified. By the end of the week, dozens more. There was no paperwork, no approval, just quiet determination and survival instinct. And it worked. Hayes downed 2 more zeros on August 22nd. Mitchell scored 3 on the 25th. Pilots who'd gone months without a kill suddenly came home with victories. At Gussap, a crew chief named James Watkins tried it on a single Lightning after hearing rumors from WW2’s. His pilot came back from the next mission with his first confirmed kill after 8 weeks in combat. Watkins modified 4 more aircraft. Other mechanics followed. By early September, at least 40 P-38s in New Guinea carried McKenna's tensioner. Engineering officers noticed something odd during inspections but couldn't find it. The crews removed the tensioners before checks, then reinstalled them after. The numbers told the truth even if the paperwork didn't. In July, U.S. pilots in the Southwest Pacific lost 2 P-38s for every 0 destroyed. In August, the ratio dropped to 1.3 to 1. By September, it was nearly even. Something had changed, and officially nobody knew what. But the Japanese did. Reports from the 11th Air Fleet in late August mentioned that American Lightnings were turning faster, rolling harder, reversing quicker. The tactics that had worked for months were failing. Even Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, Japan's top ace with 64 confirmed kills, took notice. On September 3, 1943, Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, Japan's most celebrated ace, sighted a lone P-38 Lightning over Wewak. He'd fought dozens of American aircraft before and trusted his instincts completely. His standard tactic was simple: lure the enemy into a turning fight, wait for the heavy American fighter to begin its roll, then reverse direction and slide inside its turn radius. It had worked every time, but not this time. Sakai banked left, rolled hard, and then snapped his 0 back the other way, expecting the Lightning to lag behind as it always did. Instead, the P-38 reversed with him instantly. For a heartbeat, the 2 aircraft nearly collided head-on. Tracers flashed past Sakai's canopy as he yanked his stick down and dove for the clouds. He escaped barely. But as he leveled off, one thought burned through his mind: that Lightning shouldn't have been able to move like that. When he landed, Sakai was shaken and furious. He had mastered the timing of every Allied fighter. He knew exactly how long it took a P-38 to roll, to pull, to climb. But this one had rolled too fast, too precisely. Something had changed. He wasn't the only one who noticed. Other veteran Japanese pilots began filing similar reports. The Americans weren't flying differently. Their formations, their tactics, even their attack patterns were the same. But their planes, especially the P-38s, were suddenly sharper, quicker, more responsive. Japanese intelligence tried to uncover the reason. Wreckage from downed Lightnings was carefully examined. Engines, armaments, wings, control systems. Everything looked standard. No new parts, no experimental upgrades, no visible changes. The mystery deepened. What they couldn't see was the truth, hidden deep inside the aircraft's boom. A 6-inch strip of piano wire, bent into a Z and installed by the hands of a mechanic who just wanted to save a pilot's life. Even if Japanese engineers had found it, they might not have understood what it did. It wasn't a new weapon or an advanced engine design. It was simply a way to remove a few fractions of an inch of slack in the control cables. But that tiny adjustment changed everything. By mid-September, Japanese Zero squadrons were losing aircraft at a rate they hadn't seen since early in the war. Pilots who had once dominated the skies suddenly found themselves outmaneuvered. Their confidence, built on 2 years of aerial superiority, was cracking. Veterans who used to dive into every fight now hesitated. They weren't sure if their trusted tactics still worked. Some tried to adapt, abandoning tight turning battles in favor of quick hit-and-run attacks. But that meant giving up their one advantage, maneuverability. The Zero could outturn anything, but it couldn't outrun or outgun a P-38. Others doubled down, pushing harder into dogfights, trying to prove they could still win. Many never came back. In September alone, several of Japan's most experienced pilots were shot down attempting tactics that had worked flawlessly just 2 months earlier. The real problem was that the Japanese were fighting an enemy they couldn't see. They knew the Americans had changed something, but they didn't know what or how. You can't develop tactics against an innovation you don't even know exists. By the end of September, the 11th Air Fleet had lost 38 fighters in combat with P-38s. American losses were just 22. The ratio had flipped. For the first time in the Pacific War, the Lightning was killing more Zeros than it was losing. Tokyo noticed. New orders went out across Japanese air units. Avoid combat with P-38s unless you outnumber them significantly. That single line marked a shift in the Pacific Air War. The hunter had become the hunted. And all because of one mechanic's midnight modification. A scrap of piano wire never approved, never documented, but powerful enough to tilt the balance of the sky. The change was never made official. In October 1943, the Army Air Forces Engineering Command finally learned of the modification when a maintenance inspector at WW2’s noticed inconsistent control cable readings. He traced them back to the tensioners, filed a report, and sent it up the chain of command. The report sat in offices for weeks as officers debated what to do. The modification broke regulations. It hadn't been tested, certified, or cleared. But the data was undeniable. Squadrons that used it were surviving longer. Their kill ratios were climbing. Against every rule in the book, McKenna's tiny, forbidden fix had saved lives, and quietly rewritten a chapter of the Pacific Air War. The real question wasn't whether McKenna's modification worked. Everyone who flew those missions already knew it did. The question was what to do about it. Should the Army Air Forces punish the mechanics who installed an unapproved alteration, or quietly pretend it had been authorized all along? In November 1943, Lockheed sent a small engineering team halfway across the world to New Guinea to investigate. They inspected the modified aircraft, ran stress calculations, tested the new cable tension system, and even conducted live flight trials. Their verdict was clear. The modification was safe, simple, and brilliant. It should have been part of the P-38's original design. Lockheed quickly incorporated a similar tensioning system into the new P-38J model, which entered production in December 1943. But the name of the man who'd first solved the problem, Staff Sergeant James McKenna, appeared nowhere in the records. No medal, no commendation, not even a mention in the technical reports. The official paperwork credited engineering analysis, as if it had come from a desk, not a dirt-covered mechanic's hands on a jungle airstrip. Captain William Hayes survived the war. He flew 63 combat missions, shot down 11 Japanese aircraft, and came home to Iowa in 1945. He married his high school sweetheart, raised 4 children, and spent nearly 4 decades crop dusting over the same farmland he'd left behind. Every August 17th, without fail, Hayes picked up the phone and called McKenna, just to say thank you for saving his life. Major Tom Mitchell made it through as well. He became a squadron commander, led his men through the Philippines campaign, and finished the war with 16 confirmed victories. He stayed in the Air Force until 1963, retiring as a colonel. And wherever he went, he told McKenna's story to every new maintenance officer he trained, reminding them that sometimes the best solutions come from the people on the ground who see problems the engineers never do. As for McKenna, he left the service in 1946 and went back to California. He opened a small garage in Long Beach 2 years later and spent the next 40-plus years doing what he loved, fixing engines. He rarely spoke about the war. When people asked, he'd simply say, "I was a mechanic. I fixed airplanes, that's all." Then in 1991, a military historian digging through maintenance logs from the Pacific found repeated mentions of a piano wire tensioner installed by field crews in New Guinea. Tracing the lead through veteran records, he eventually found McKenna, 73 years old and still turning wrenches part-time in his garage. When the historian asked about the modification, McKenna shrugged it off. "It wasn't anything special," he said. "It just needed doing." But the historian's analysis told a different story. The change McKenna made may have saved between 80 and 100 American pilots, based on survival rates in squadrons that used his fix. McKenna never kept count. What he remembered were the faces, Hayes, Mitchell, Watkins, and the others who made it home. That was enough for him. James McKenna passed away in 2006 at the age of 88. His obituary mentioned that he'd served as an aircraft mechanic during World War II. It didn't mention the piano wire tensioner. It didn't say that his quiet act of defiance helped reshape the way American fighters flew. It didn't note that he'd broken regulations to save lives. His old garage still stands in Long Beach, under new ownership now. And on the wall in the back office hangs a faded black and white photo. A young mechanic in coveralls standing beside a P-38 Lightning. The date scrawled on the back reads, August 1943, New Guinea. That's where innovation really happens in war, not in boardrooms or engineering offices, but on the flight lines, in the mud and heat, where sergeants and mechanics find solutions because waiting for permission costs lives. If this story moved you, take a second to like this video. It helps us bring more forgotten moments like this to light. Subscribe if you believe these stories deserve to live on. Every name matters. Every story counts. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Whether you're in Texas or Tasmania, a veteran or a history lover, you're part of a community that refuses to forget. Thank you for watching. And thank you for keeping history alive.